He said, why don't you go to a payphone where they won't know who you are or where you're calling from, and call up Tacoma and tell them about this ticket and ask them what you're really facing. What would it really be? Because I'm still going based on the two drunken wannabe attorneys from my couch, right? I have no idea what I'm facing. I call them up, I give them my name, ask for wants and warrants, and it turns out that when the cop entered that ticket, he entered it incorrectly, and I did not have driving on a suspended driver's license. I had driving on expired registration, which is not the crime that I committed, but that's the way they entered it in the computer. It was a $93 fine. So I called my sponsor. He says, well, call him back and give him your name again and just have him be certain that there isn't two tickets. I called him back. And they told me, absolutely, the only thing you have is you owe us $93 for driving on a suspended registration. So I went home and I told my wife, I have good news and bad news. She said, what's the good news? The good news is that I can clean up my stuff in Tacoma. It's going to cost us $93. Bad news is you're going to Florida. And at 5 years sober, my wife sat in DUI classes in Las Vegas to clear that up. So that's on a more serious note, I have two other amends that I had to make that I want to share with you. And one of them was to my mom. You know, I told you guys about the difficult relationship my mom and I had in my childhood, and the separation and the distance between us. And I get sober. And the first year or so that I was sober, I would talk to her every week on the phone. We didn't really see much of each other. She lived in Chicago at the time, and her husband was in the steel castings business, and there's an exhibition in Vegas that he had to come to. My mom came along with him. She figured I can see him and visit him and, you know, check on my son, but if he's full of crap like you think he probably is, at least I'll be with my husband at this exhibition, and it'll be a trip to Vegas. Well, she comes out, and I'm going to make amends to her. And my sponsor has always told me this story about with his folks, where when he made amends, his dad let him off the hook for the money he owed him. And his sponsor said to him, that doesn't matter. You need to find a way to pay the money back. Your dad can't forgive the debt you owe, you got to pay. And so I get to dinner with my mom and my stepdad, and I explained to my mom about this motorcycle that had been in her name that I had crashed, and I left the country, and she still had to make those payments, and my mom never had any money, and it was a big hardship for her. And I'd been in her wallet, and I'd stolen money over the years from her, and the way I figured it, I owed her several $1,000s, and I wanted to find a way to pay it back. And I didn't have a lot of money, but I'd like to make payments. And she says, no, honey, you don't owe me the money. And I had the story from my sponsor. I said, Mom, you don't understand. You got to have a way for me to pay this back. And she said, no, you really don't owe me the money. Your aunt died, and she left you and your brother and your stepbrother a pile of money each. And they gave your brother and your stepbrother theirs. And I kept yours because you owed it to me. I wasn't mad. I'm like, good, because I can't afford these payments and that debt's been paid. I never did mention that to my sponsor. I just thought it was great that I'm off the hook. So fast forward a little bit, I meet my wife, we get married, and my wife is a real family-oriented person. She talks to her mom every day for an hour on the phone, which I can't imagine what you would say to somebody every day for 5 minutes on the phone, but she talks to her mom every day for an hour on the phone. And my mom's going to be her mother-in-law. She wants to talk to my mom. I tell her it's not a good idea. I talk to my mom once a week. I call my mom once a week because I want to be a good AA guy. That's what good AA guys do. I call my mom every Sunday. Every Sunday at 1 o'clock, I call my mom, about a 5-minute phone call. I say, hey, Mom, how are you? She says, I'm fine, good. Are you fine? I'm fine, fine. You're fine, I'm fine, fine. We're fine, fine. Talk to you next Sunday, fine. Because when I see my mom and I talk to my mom, she's this 9-foot giant that judges me and has opinions and wants to tell me how I should behave, and it's cold. And I love my mom theoretically, right? In theory, I love my mom. But in reality, there's no connection, and she intimidates me. And I'm not, but I call her fine. I'm fine. You're fine, 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 fine. Well, this one time I call her and I go, hi, Mom, how are you? She goes, fine, good, you're fine, fine. Yeah, I'm fine, you're fine, fine. Everything's fine, fine. And before I could say goodbye, she goes, how's that thing going at work? I go, what thing? Well, how do you know about it? Oh, well, I was talking to Jackie. I go running downstairs. Don't talk to her. What are you doing? Now they're getting close. They're like becoming friends, right? My wife is making friends with the enemy. Then we have a son, and there's me and my brother, my stepbrother, and I'm the only one. I have the only grandchild. So when my mom and my stepdad retired, they could have gone anywhere in the world, but they chose to come to Vegas because they wanted to be near their only grandson. They didn't want to be near me, right? No delusion there, but at least I made enough effort to where I didn't make it feel like they couldn't. There was enough of a repaired connection where they were able to come to Vegas, but my mom wanted to be near her grandson. So now she's coming to the house, right? And I don't want to be this way. I don't want to be this way. But when I hear her knock on the door, you have to understand, my mom she's 4'9½". Right? She's a little frame of a woman. She knocks on the door. It sounds like, right? It's like frightening. Boom, boom, boom. I open the door, she comes out, it's a shadow of a woman. I'm just on guard all the time. I just feel like I have to watch every word I say. Everything has to be carefully thought out because she's going to have an opinion and a judgment and something to say, and I'm going to get that look. You know the look. You've all seen the look. I was sitting in the living room one day, and this has been going on for a couple of years. And I am so grateful that I was sober a while when this happened so I could have the vision of it for what it was. Because had this happened earlier in my sobriety, I never would have gotten the gift I was about to get. This is probably in 2004. I was probably about 8 years sober. And my mom and my stepdad and my wife and I are sitting in the living room, and my mom starts to talk about how she has car problems. Now, I'm in the car business. Cars are easy for me. At this point in my life, I'm making more money than I've ever made. I could afford to help my mom with a car. So I say to my mom, Mom, let's do this. Let me help you get a car. She says to me, my own mother, no, that's okay, honey. I don't want your charity. This is more evidence for what my mom is like, referring to me trying to do something magnanimous as charity, right? I take a deep breath and I say to her what I think is a lie. I think it's a lie. I think I'm making a joke. I say, Mom, you know there was that motorcycle that I wrecked and that money I took. I never really did make amends for that stuff. Why don't you let me really make amends? It won't be charity. We'll call it me leveling the field. My stepdad, who is Scottish, and if you know anything about the Scots, they make the Jews look like the most generous people on the planet. So my stepdad says, it's a free car, for God's sakes. Take the car. It's free. He said free, for God's sakes. I swear to God. It's free. So I trade her a car in, get her a little car, nothing fancy. I'm making payments on the car, no big deal. I couldn't have missed the money if I'd tried. $200 payment every month. Would have been impossible for me to miss the money with where I was at financially at that stage of my life. But I tell you, something miraculous happened. Something that is hard to explain, but very clear when experienced. See, I owed my mom. And I knew I owed my mom. And in order for my ego to be okay with me owing my mom, My ego had to rewrite history, had to change the past to turn my mom into the kind of person it would be okay to owe. It had to create a story about her that wasn't true. It had grains of truth, but it wasn't true. It had to turn her into a monster. I had to have a story in my head that if I got to sit with you one-on-one and tell you about my mom, you would say, oh, it's okay that you screwed her out of that money. She kind of deserves it. I had to write that story. I had to write that story for it to be okay for me to owe. And when I started to pay, and the payments started to be made, and I started to feel even with my mom, I no longer needed the story to make it okay for me to owe. And my mom started to change in front of my eyes. And what my mom turned into is a woman that in a difficult situation did the very best she could. A woman that sacrificed the best years of her life. A woman that worked 2 jobs and she walked to work in the snow. She was 40 years old when we got our first family car. I was 15 when we got our first car. We didn't have a car as kids. She had to walk everywhere. She cleaned houses of the girls that she used to go to high school with. She went without. I never even really knew how poor we were. I always had new clothes and new toys and new stuff. She was buying her own clothes out of secondhand stores. She'd date a guy and he'd raise his voice or be disrespectful to me and my brother, and she'd kick him out the house. She sacrificed everything for me and him. And I wrote a story to defend myself from owing her a couple of $1,000. I wrote a story and changed history to make it okay to owe. It's true what Don says, that we make amends to the people in our family because we owe them, and they deserve the dignity of hearing that we're sorry. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, what about the person that we hate? In that case, we take the bit in our teeth because we find it more beneficial to us. My ego will defend its right. My ego will tell me stories about me that I have no defense against. It will say, Sheldon, you're a piece of crap. You don't deserve nothing. Of course nobody likes you. You're worthless. You're a scumbag. You're a dirtbag. You're a liar. You're a cheat, and you're a thief. You don't deserve God's grace. You don't deserve His love. You don't deserve anybody's love. You don't deserve opportunities. You don't deserve advancement. You don't deserve happiness. And unless I feed my spirit something to say in reply, it will be the only voice that rattles inside my head. But when I start to do esteemable things and I start to clear up the wreckage, my spirit gets to say, wait a minute, you fixed that with your mom. Yeah, you made some mistakes, but you're a good guy. You did the best you could to turn that around. You got her that car, remember? You told her you were sorry. You hugged her and you cried. You're not that bad of a guy. In the absence of the good deeds that I can do in this world, the large piece of it being the amends, when the ego tears me down, the spirit has no response. Think about the people that you're angry at and ask yourself, what do you owe? You know, Don's talking about the IRS. Next time you're at a meeting and someone's going on and on about how much they hate the IRS, ask them how much they owe. I guarantee there's a dollar amount. All right, I guarantee it. 2008, the world went mad. We all lost houses and we hated the banks as if it was their fault. Wasn't their fault when they lent us the money, boy. We were eager for the dough then. So what happens is when I owe, I create stories about the people that I owe to justify that it's okay that I owe. And when I start to level the playing field, the anger and the fear and the resentment start to go. You know, this 180-degree turn that we talk about in step 4 begins in step 4, but it ends in step 9. This old timer, John, the same guy that told me about treading water in Lake Mead, said to me, Sheldon, you're going to buy your self-respect, your dignity, and your self-esteem back the very same way you spent it. 1 nickel on one dime at a time. And God bless you on that journey. I'm going to tell you one very quick story, and we'll take a break. While I was up in Bremen at that time, I lived in a little A-frame house that I was renting. I was the national spokesperson for Kenwood Appliances, had plenty of money, rented a cute little A-frame. Problem was I would get paid once a month in the middle of the month, and while I would drink and snort all the money, and I wouldn't last till rent day. Rent was due on the 5th. I got paid on the 15th. I was always broke on the 5th. So I was always late on the rent on this place. And it was pathetic because I could easily have afforded it. But I fell 2 months behind on the rent. And I get to this point where I get this ticket now for this driving without a license, and I'm moving to New Jersey to be closer to the company. So I call the landlord and I invite him over and I tell him, I'm really sorry, I got to move. I'm really sorry, I got to move. And I don't have your 2 months rent. And this guy gets a look of horror on his face. And he says, Sheldon, I've lived here for 20 years. The place is almost paid off, but not yet. I have a mortgage on it. I met a girl. I moved in with her. We're hoping to pay this off, and it'll be our retirement. I don't have the money to catch up the mortgage. You have to pay me. I'm going to lose this place if I don't get the payments to pay the mortgage. And I tell him, well, I don't have the money. I'm terribly sorry. You're on your own, pal. What do I care? It's your problem, and I leave. And I get sober, and I realize that I've probably stolen this guy's retirement from him. I had no way to pay him. I don't know if he lost the place. I don't know what happened. I'm calculating my amends, and if I cost this guy this, what do I owe him? A couple $100,000? I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know where to begin. I start doing pretty well, and I'm not willing to make the amends. It's going to be too much money. There's no way I can make the amends. It's impossible. But I start doing better and better. Now I got a little bit of rental property that I've acquired, and people are late on the rent on that rental property, and I know it's because the universe is paying me back for what I did to this guy Don with his A-frame up in Bremen, and I know that. And I just can't live with myself anymore. And I go to my sponsor and I say, look, I don't know what to do. I think I owe this guy $250,000 or something, whatever that A-frame is worth. He goes, well, how much did you stip him for? Well, it was about $2,500. That he told me that the place was getting foreclosed on and that I'd cost him his place. And Bob says, well, maybe you don't really owe him that much, but why don't you call him up and talk to him? And so now I got to find the guy. And the only way I know how to find the guy is I spend money into a background check on myself to find my address in Bremerton. That I do, because I don't know how to get a hold of the guy. So I find my address, and then I do property search to see who owns the address at those dates. Then I do a background check on the guy that owned the place. And this is like a 6-month journey, and eventually I find the guy, and I call him up, and I say, hi, is this Don? He says, yeah, it's Don. I go, hi, Don, it's Sheldon Fede. I don't know if you remember me. And he says, oh, I remember you. Well, now the blood in my veins is ice cold because I know what's coming. You're the guy that cost me my... I'm living in a homeless shelter, but... I said, well, if you remember, I was living at your place, and I think I'm the guy that caused you to get that property foreclosed on, and I don't know what your retirement looks like, and I'm so sorry for the damage I caused you. I want to make it right. And he starts laughing. He goes, hell, I've been telling that story to people for the last 25 years. Anytime anybody's late on the rent, I lay them on the foreclosure story. I figure if you're going to stiff me, you're going to suffer a little bit of embarrassment and uncomfortability along the way. And if you got a conscience, maybe a little guilt. Because I still own that damn property. I go, what do I owe you? And he says, hold on a minute. And he goes to sounds like a drawer in a file, and he pulls out a piece of paper. He goes, $1,937.22. Well, I'd like to send you that. He goes, well, we'll see if you do, kid. Nobody ever has paid me, but here's my new address, blah, blah, blah. And I send him $2,500. A little bit of interest on top and for hassle. I had been tortured by a story I had told myself. I think I was 15 years sober at this point. telling my wife when people didn't pay, it's my fault they didn't pay the rent on the rental property, honey. I screwed this guy up in Bremerton. I get a letter from him. And it was the nicest letter. I kept the letter. I still have the letter at home. He told me that he'd owned various rental properties all throughout his life and that many people had stiffed him, and he wasn't mad at anybody. He understood these things happen. But nobody had ever sent him the money back. And he was glad to hear I was sober in AA. And if he ever knew anybody that needed help with a drug or alcohol problem, he knew where to send them, because the people in Alcoholics Anonymous had done amazing work in my life. And he was proud to see that I'd become a good member of society. And he was glad to know that Alcoholics Anonymous works. We don't know. When Don talks about the stones we drop in the water and the ripples of negativity, we drop bigger stones in that same water in Alcoholics Anonymous when we're sober. And the positive ripples that follow are bigger and more powerful. Let's take a break. Back in 10 minutes. Talk about step 10, which Amanda's very excited about. I don't know much about step 10 because I was rendered perfect after 9. So page 84, after the 9-step promises that we read at meetings, and just if you're new or relatively new, it's just interesting to me that the thing we read is the promises, the thing we call the promises, don't come after step 1, they come after step 9. It's just interesting to me. If you don't really feel the promises in your life, it's because they come after step 9. Just to point that out. Anyway, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests that we continue to take personal inventory, continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We've vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We have entered into the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. It's not an overnight matter. It should continue for a lifetime. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately. We can make amends quickly when we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance of others is our code. There's a lot in that paragraph. There's a lot in that paragraph. One of the biggest words in that paragraph, I think, is when. When these crop up. You know, I made that silly joke about how I was rendered pure after step 9. But there is this feeling that by now I should be better, and that, I understand I need a thing in place if I get resentful or dishonest or self-seeking or afraid. In the unlikely event that. I told my wife one time, I said, she's in the program, she's new. She's 4 months less sober than I am. She's new. Next month I'll be 22, and until December, she'll be my little newcomer when she turns 22. But I tell her all the time, I go, honey, I've learned one thing in AA, it's that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of my troubles. Your selfishness and your self-centeredness. When these crop up. I am, as we talked about in step 6, I'm a broken person by design. I'm not supposed to be perfect. I'm a human being having a human experience. And my humanness means that I am going to have selfish, dishonest, self-seeking behavior driven by fear. The good thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is that we have a process by which we can take action that will allow us to survive our own humanity. I've been going through some things this last year in my business life and in my personal life that if step 10 did not exist, I would not have been able to survive. I hope that through continued work in step 10, that I will survive these things. I believe I will. I believe that Alcoholics Anonymous absolutely works in all circumstances. But the thing that I have to be willing to do is the thing that it says in 4 different places in that short paragraph, that I have to be willing to continue this way of life, that I have to be willing to continue to look for God. I have to be willing to continue to look for my own mistakes. I have to be willing to continue to concede that the problems in my life are generated by my reaction or lack of reaction, the way that I feel, the way that I experience the world through the eyes of a selfish, self-centered, self-seeking individual. And that just like in step 4, and often I mention this in step 4, and I didn't today, and we'll talk about it now, one of the things that you hear in Alcoholics Anonymous an awful lot is that when something bad happens, we should look for our part. You ever hear that? I'm going to look for my part. And there's a problem with that. There's a problem with me looking for my part. There's an insinuation when I talk about looking for my part. If this is the problem, here's the problem. Here's the wrongdoing. Here's the bad situation. If I'm going to look for my part, and so now, which one's the part? Isn't the insinuation when I look for my part that you did more, you were more wrong than me, but I had a little bit of a piece to play? The Big Book says that we put out of our minds the wrongs others have done and resolutely look for our own mistakes. It says here, admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. Isn't that what I'm doing when I'm looking for my part? I'm saying that, these things went wrong, but you did more than me. And what I have to be willing to do, whether it's in step 10 or whether it's in step 4, is I have to be willing to say that no matter what other people did, I'm going to put that out of my mind. I'm going to imagine they did no wrong, and I'm resolutely going to look for my own mistakes. One of the relationships in my life that has been very difficult is the relationship with my father. I made amends to my dad, and we created a good relationship. And things went very well with he and I. He's a very magnanimous, loving guy. And he also retired, and he also moved to Vegas. And we became very, very close. But my dad is my dad, and I am me. And so we had some angst between us that would come up over the years, and every time something came up, I'd go to my sponsor, and my sponsor would make me make amends to him. And it started to wear a little thin. It started to wear a little thin, like, how come I'm always the one that's got to make amends? Why isn't it at some point I can't sit back and I'm willing to say that I got a big piece of this, that I have a part in this. I'm willing to say that. But can we agree that my dad's kind of screwed up too? How about on this one, Spons? How about on this one, I made amends the last 5 times. How about on this one, we just sit and see whether or not he's going to make amends? Let's give him the opportunity for spiritual growth. It doesn't seem fair that I'm stealing all of the opportunities to grow. He might want to develop too. My sponsor would say mean stuff to me like, Sheldon, how long you been in AA? And at the time, probably about 14, 15 years, 14, 15 years. 14, 15 years, 14, 15 years you've been in AA. Yep, 14, 15 years. You've been trying to become a good, kind, caring, honest man with integrity, a forgiving, loving human being, yet working on it pretty hard. How often? Oh, most days, I try and pray and meditate every day. We'll talk about the word try and pray and meditate in the next session, but I try and pray and meditate every day, go to meetings most days, talk to you most days, talk to the guys I sponsor most days, and I'm pretty active. I do quite a lot of stuff. I'm really doing the best I can. You're doing the best you can. 15 years. Everyday activity in Alcoholics Anonymous. Yes, and you're still a screw-up. Yes. How much time has your dad spent in spiritual development? None. It's not his thing. He's not an alcoholic, doesn't need to go to AA, never worked the 12 steps. But you expect him to be spiritually more developed than you after 15 years of... I know you're a slow learner, Sheldon. But after 15 years, you should be at least where most people are at 15 months. You'd think you'd have grown a little bit in that time. Well, then it happened. The big thing happened. My dad went back to England and met a girl while he was there, a girl he'd known 40 years before, and they fell instantly in love. My dad came back to Las Vegas and said, I'm leaving, kid, I'm going back to England, going to go make a life with this woman. My son was 4 years old at the time, and my son was in love with his grandpa. He called him Umpapa. Right? Who knows where he got that from? That's what he, Umpapa, called him Umpapa. I was in love with him. They'd play on the floor together, and it was just amazing to watch. Well, now my dad's leaving my 4-year-old son, just like he left me when I was 2. Right? He's going to ruin my son's life. He's doing it again. See, this is what he does. He's doing it again. On his way out the door, him and I owned some property together. We sold the property. I paid him for the property. I didn't do a title search. Why would you do a title search? It's my dad. That's why you do a title search. Because it's your dad. And he just neglected to tell me of some liens that he had put on the property to the tune of about $40,000. So now you can mess with me and you can abandon me for the second or third time in my life. You can hurt my son. You can abandon him just like you did me when I was 2. You can break my wife's heart like he did when he left. But screw with my money. It's a whole nother level. Right? That's a whole, to the tune of 40, that's a whole nother level. So I hate him. I hate him. And I go to my sponsor and I'm screaming at my sponsor. And I don't scream at my sponsor, but I'm screaming, spit's coming out of my mouth. I'm so angry. And I'm telling him, this is your fault. This is your fault. You made me make amends to him. You made me bring him closer into my life. You made me get entangled with him. You owe me the 40 grand. I knew I wasn't going to get it out of my dad. At least I thought I had a shot with my sponsor. But I told him, I said, I'm never making amends to that man again. Never make me do that again. Never make me put that man back in my life again. Never do that. Don't even bring it up. There's no way. I hate that son of a bitch. He is done. He is out of my life forever. And my sponsor said, okay, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But we need to be honest about what you're doing and what that means, and then if that's the decision you want to make, then that's the decision you should make. If you write your dad out of your life for the rest of his life, he's old and he's not going to live forever. He might have 5 or 10 years left. And for 10 years, you'll shut him out of your life, you'll shut him out of his grandson's life, you'll shut him out of the family's life, and he will suffer for that and he will be punished. And when the 5 or 10 years is up, he will die. And it will be over for him. You, however, will live for another 30 or 40 years. And for 30 or 40 years, you will suffer with the knowledge that you come from bad blood. You will suffer with the knowledge that the people that bore you are bad people. They can't be trusted. The blood in your veins is tainted blood. You'll remember the voice of your mother when she used to tell you you're just like your father, and you'll remember what that means, and you'll know it means you're no good. And you will suffer with the separation and pain of your father when he dies, of the resentment you have against him. And every time you smell a smell, see a sight, hear a song, anything that happens that reminds you of your father, you will be reminded of the poison and the anger, and you will suffer that way for 40 years, and then you will die. Your son, however, will live for another 40 years. And after you are gone, and for the 80 years from now forward, your son will remember the anger and pain that you put into his life. He'll remember the negativity that you talked to him about his grandfather. He won't remember the joy of crawling around on the floor with his grandfather and playing with toys. He will just know that his grandfather is a piece of crap. He'll know his grandfather hurt his father. He'll know the blood in his veins is no good. He will have the resentment and angst that you will make sure he suffers from, and he will have that for 80 years. And that will be your gift to him. Do you think you'll ever let your son down? Not on purpose. But we got a lot of living to do, me and him. And I'm a flawed individual. I'm a broken spirit that makes mistakes. I'm one of God's kids, perfectly human, likely to cause harm wherever I go, regardless of my intention. I'm certain I'll let him down. What do you want to teach him? Do you want to teach him that when the men in the Fetty family disappoint their kids, that the kids should hate their father and write him off and kick him out of their life? Or do you want to teach him love and compassion? Do you want to teach him forgiveness? What do you want to teach your son? Do you want to teach your son love and compassion or punishment and torture? What do you want to teach your son? What lesson would you like your son to have? It's yours to teach. Get ready. You're teaching it one way or the other. What do you want to teach your son? Do you want to teach your son it's okay to hate his father? What do you want to do? I got to make amends to my dad. I don't know how. I don't know where to begin. I didn't do anything wrong this time. I get the phone call. My dad's got to have a surgery. He's got a 30% chance of living. Most likely he's not going to live through it. He's got some kind of an aneurysm or embolism or something in his main valve leading to his heart. They got to fix it up. If it bursts before the surgery, he's dead. If the surgery goes wrong, he's dead. There's a small chance he'll live. Surgery's in a week. I got to go back to England. I got to go visit him. I got to go make these amends. Thankfully, I'm in a position financially at the time where I could make that trip. I bought a ticket and I went back to England, and I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what I'm going to say. On the flight on the way over, I'm praying and I'm meditating and I'm thinking about what I'm going to say, and it comes to me. And I get in front of my dad and I tell him, Pops, before you go into the surgery, we got to talk. I said, I want you to know, Dad, that I'm really grateful that you're my father. And he looked at me confused. He goes, I'm a lousy dad. And the truth is that he was. And he's a smart guy, and he knew that. But if he was delusional, if he didn't know he was a lousy dad, I had told him numerous times in his face, leaving little spit on the end of his nose. You're a lousy goddamn father. I told him. He knew what I thought. He said, I'm a lousy dad. I said, Pops, that's not what I mean. I don't want to talk about the past. I just want you to know that because you're my father, because your blood is in my veins, I have some gifts that I am grateful for. I said, Pops, people tell me I'm funny. You know, Mom, not so funny. My sense of humor is because you're my father. It is because I am like you that I have a great sense of humor and a good outlook on life. When I was 16 years old, he taught me my trade. He taught me how to be a salesman. Side by side at swap meets and county fairs, he taught me how to be a salesman. He gave me that gift. And that gift is also a gift of his DNA. He was a great salesman. Because I am like him, I've been able to afford a wonderful standard of living for me and my family, and that is a gift of his. I said, Dad, the bottom line is that I like who I am today. And who I am is your son, and I am grateful I'm your son. I want you to know that regardless of everything that has happened, I want you to know that I'm proud that you're my dad, and I'm proud that I'm your son. And he put his head down, and when he brought his head back up, he was crying. And I remember thinking to myself, you done good, kid. Can't wait to get back and tell Bob how another amends went well. But then, through my dad's tears, he says, you know, kid, you know I'm dying. And I don't know what happens next. This surgery goes well. It's going to prolong it a year or two. There's not much more to go. And I don't know what happens next. I don't know if the lights go out and it's over. I don't know if I go to some kind of a judgment day. I don't know if I go right to hell. I don't know if I get another shot in some kind of reincarnation at this world. I don't know what happens next. But he said, if I get to be reincarnated and I get another shot at life, I hope I can come back as the kind of man I've watched you grow into in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not much on the inner child stuff, but somewhere inside me, a little 2-year-old boy was healed. Somewhere inside of me, this kid that just wanted daddy's approval and never thought he could ever have it was given it. I thought I was going to England to see my dad to make amends for him. I didn't know that I was going to receive the best gift that I could receive. Over the next year and a half, my wife and son and I made 4 trips to England to make sure we could spend time with him. When he died, I was alone with him in the room, holding his hand when he took his last breath. And I understood, and I loved. And today, when I think of my dad, I think of great joy. When I think of my dad, I think of this imperfect, mixed up, muddled up dude that was trying to do his best and just trying to get what we all want, a little joy, a little happiness in this world. I love my dad. Now, I'm no fool. I know that if my dad hadn't have died and we'd had several more years on this planet together, I'd have said something or he'd have said something. I'd have done something or he'd have done something. And if I was lucky, there'd have been more amends that needed to be made. But I learned something. I learned something that if I got one message, it's this. Protect and defend the upswings in the relationships that you have. If you've got family members in your life that right now you're not always been close to, but you're close to them right now, take every action you can to defend that upswing. And if you're in a downswing with a family member, someone you're not talking to, someone you're angry at, you're the one in AA. You're the one with the program. Find your way back to them. Fight your way out of the downswing. Forgive, love, let go, release. Find a way to, it might be hard. It might hurt you. But you're in AA. It's what we do. Anything other than that ain't AA. I don't know what it is, but it ain't AA. Because our goal and our job and our desire and our mission through step 10 is to reduce the separation between us and the people in our lives, to create love and kindness and tolerance and forgiveness. I don't want you to, as I sit down from this session, I don't want you to think for a minute I do this perfectly. This is a principle which I cannot do perfectly all the time, but I claim progress towards. If you follow me around, you will watch me behave other than what I just talked about, right? I want you to know that. I'm not preaching here. I want you to know that I have a goal and I want to share that goal with you, and if you desire for that to be your goal too, I welcome you to share that goal with me. But let's fight for the upswings in our relationships. Let's fight out of the downswings in our relationships. Let's protect the love in our life. And let's be grateful that step 10 is the tool that we are given to allow that to happen. To quote the late great Sandy Beach, AA really comes down to just a couple of things. When something goes wrong in your life that you're not happy or comfortable with, you get a resentment, you get angry, you get afraid, you got separation. You just got to ask yourself a question. Is it their fault or is it my fault? Is it their fault or is it my fault? If it's their fault, forgive them. If it's my fault, apologize. You'll usually find it's a little bit of both. But just do the forgiving, do the apologizing, and find your way back to the love. Keep thinking you need my notes. I've read your notes. I keep leaving you mine.
I'm going to muddle through. Non-alcoholic. I want to talk about bottom of page 84 on to page 85, which for me, when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I would describe this as the fairy tale of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to tell you, when I came to AA and people said they didn't drink anymore, I believed you. But when you talked about not drinking and not missing it, I knew you were lying. I knew you'd do anything to drink and get away with it if you could. I mean, I just thought you were all hanging out here just holding on for dear life, because that's what not drinking feels like to me. You don't drink and you hold on for dear life. And I couldn't believe that people actually talked about the fact they no longer drank anymore and they didn't miss it. I didn't know what that was like. I had a lot of experience with quitting drinking, but no experience with quitting drinking and being comfortable. But by this part in our program of recovery, on the bottom of page 84, we get to hear about this fairy tale coming true. We have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity would have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us with any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it. Neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. And I'm so grateful for the fact that I'm a free man today, and I can go anywhere the free men go, do anything that free men do. And the freedom that I've been given is a direct result of my membership in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got to tell you, I didn't see it coming. That was never going to happen for me. I was never going to be a guy that was free from the drink. And sometimes, you know, I get so spoiled in my life, I forget that. I forget that central fact of my life. And sometimes it hits me. You know, I'll be driving along and I'll just have that crystal clear thought. I'll go, man, I don't have to drink whiskey today. And that's a big deal for me. And I hope I never lose sight of that. The freedom just from the bottle that I've been given by Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I'm sober, I'm back in the game and anything's possible. And so I guard my sobriety. I don't take it very lightly. And I love these promises, these 10-step promises that talk about that. But I want, you know, Sheldon talked on the 10-step, and he talked about this little short paragraph that has so much information in there. And the first thing you notice about it is you got the word continue in 4 different places. And if somebody had been through the steps and they'd had the psychic change and they came to me and they said, well, what the hell do I do now? I'd say, continue. For God's sakes, continue. Because most of the time when you find somebody who gets the gift in Alcoholics Anonymous, has had the merciless obsession removed, and they go back to the grinder, if you ask them what happened, usually they'll tell you a lot of different things, but it can be boiled down to this: they didn't continue. They usually talk about what they stopped doing that at one time they were doing. You know, I stopped working with others, I stopped working the steps, I stopped taking commitments, I stopped going to meetings. It's usually the lack of continuance that drives you out the doors in Alcoholics Anonymous. So we're going to talk about continuing taking personal inventory. And as Sheldon say, it doesn't say if these things crop up, it says when they crop up. It's a promise. I'm going to continue to be perfectly imperfect. So I want to tell you a couple of quick 10-step stories and that are important for me and that kind of illustrate how this thing looks like. How does a 10-step show up in my life? And there's a couple of ways, you know. There's 10 steps that are really spot check. They happen very quickly. They're very fast moving. There are other ones where I'll actually have to slow down far enough to do a 4 or 5 or 6 column inventory. How many columns we're doing this weekend, I don't know. But God, I was about, maybe about 11 years sober. And I lived in Southern California, and I was probably married 7 or 8 years at this point. And we bought a fixer. Our first house was a fixer. And if you've ever owned a fixer, you know it's like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. You always got a project going. And the project on tap that weekend was I'd already put a new roof on the garage. I had done the exterior, and now I was going to sheet the inside of the garage with 1/2-inch plywood. That way I'd have a nailable surface on the inside. And by this time, I'm becoming pretty proficient with my hands, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a beautiful Southern California Saturday, and the night before I went to this supply house, and I bought all the plywood and threw it in my truck. And while I was at the supply house, you know, the hammer display caught my eye, man. So I went over to check out the new hammers. Boy, and they had this Vaughan 24-ounce framing hammer. It was a thing of beauty, and I grabbed it, and the balance of my hand felt good, and it had a waffle end. It was so sharp you could cut your thumb with it, and I went, oh, I want this hammer. So I bought that hammer, and that night, man, I had a vision, man, of me just swinging that hammer and hanging that plywood the next day, and it was going to be great. And the first thing next morning, me and my wife, we coffeed up, and I'm in that garage. We got the radio going, and I'm hanging that 1/2-inch plywood, and she's in the corner, and we're having a great time, man. We're young, we're in love, we're grinning at each other. The music's going, it's perfect weather. She's planting her little plants, and I am swinging this hammer, and I'm sinking these 8-penny nails in this 1/2-inch CDX plywood, ba-ba-bam, ba-ba-ba-bam, and I'm thinking to myself, damn, I'm pretty good, ba-ba-bam, and I'm hanging this plywood. And at one point, I mishit this one nail, and I'm holding a piece of plywood up, and I mishit it, and that hammer goes ba-ba-bam, and it hits this thumb dead square, man, and a rooster tail of blood just squirts all over the plywood. And I did exactly what I do when I opened up my thumb with a 24-ounce framing hammer. I just cursed a blue streak as loud as I could. I made up words of profanity. I don't know if they're real words or not. Screamed them as loud as I could. I moved in a 360-degree circle, kicking everything in my radius as hard as I possibly could as I cursed. And then I finished, grabbed some duct tape, wrapped it up, went back to work. And now I notice there's a change in the environment in the garage. A cold front has moved in. And I look over at my wife, and she's got that look on her face. I've seen it before, like she just ate a lemon, you know. I'm looking at her, and I said something spiritual to her, like, what? And she goes, mm-mm. I go, well, what? What's going on? Something's obviously bothering you. And she goes, you know what? I don't want to talk about it. I said, well, why don't you tell me what's bothering you? She goes, you know, I've talked to you about it before. I don't want to get into it. You know, you don't believe me. Listen. You're 6'5", you're 280 pounds. When you scream and yell and kick things, I know you don't, it's not directed at me, but it scares the hell out of me. You terrify me. But I've talked to you about it before, and I know it's going to happen again, so let's just leave it alone. And I looked at her and I said, you got to be kidding. And I just dropped my hammer on the ground. I said, you know what? You're insane. You expect too much from me. I don't know what you expect me to be. I'm a man, damn it. You know what? You want a butler. You want somebody that does everything you want to do when you want them to do it. You ask too much of me. You're unreasonable is what you are. You know what? Go to the meeting tonight. Pick 10 guys at random. I don't care who they are. And ask them what happens when they split their thumb open with a 24-ounce framing hammer. If they're a real man, they'll tell you. They curse, they kick, they scream, they yell things, and then they wrap it up and they go back to work. You're ridiculous. And I storm out of the garage. Now I'm in my office arguing with my wife, who's still out in the garage. She's not even there. And I'm pacing back and forth like an idiot. I don't know how I ended up with you. Why did I marry you? Why did I think this was a good idea? And in the back of my mind, I hear my sponsor's voice go, this is probably a good time for a 10-step. And I know at this point I can't do a 10-step. I'm too upset. I'm cut off. I'm cut off from the process. I'm cut off from God. I'm just too angry. And I know I got to calm down. So I finally sit down. I do some deep breathing. I get my heart under control, my heart rate under control, I get my breathing under control, and I start thinking about, okay, what's going on? What's going on with me? And I start thinking about the 4-column inventory. Okay, all right. I got a resentment. That's what's going on. I'm resentful. Who am I resentful at? I'm resentful at my wife. What's the cause? She's crazy. She's unreasonable. She expects too much out of me. She doesn't want me to be a man. She's always pointing out my spiritual deficiency. There's just no room for error with this woman, you know, always. What does it affect? Well, it affects my confidence. It affects my self-esteem. It affects my security. I'm fairly certain it's going to affect my sex life. Setting aside the wrongdoings of others, I resolutely look for my own mistakes. Where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or afraid? What did she say? What did she say? She said I terrified her. Has she said that to me before? She said I terrified her, and she's told me that before. Has she said that before? Yeah, she said that to me. In fact, she said that to me several times. Huh. Well, if she said it to you several times, why don't you believe her? Do you think your wife's a liar? Oh, no. Oh, no. I think my wife's one of the most honest people I've ever met in my life. Well, if your wife tells you several times that you terrify her, she's come to you with her truth, and you don't believe her, isn't that a subtle form of calling her a liar? Yeah, I can see that. So what do you think you're going to have to do about a thing like that? We're going to have to make amends. Our 10th step says we make amends promptly if we've injured anybody. So now I got to go back out there with my tail between my legs, and I got to make amends. So I go out and I find my wife. I go, you got a minute? I need to talk to you. She goes, I don't want to talk to you. And I said, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all, but really, I need to talk to you. She goes, I don't want to talk to you. No means no. Take no for an answer. I go, baby, I just want to make amends. You got 5 minutes. So we sit down and I go, honey, you know what? You have talked to me about this before. You've been talking to me about this for years. And I got to tell you, I didn't believe you. I thought you're being over dramatic. I thought you're reacting. You know, I thought you're just being silly, to be honest with you. And the truth is, you know, that's a form of calling you a liar. And I don't think you're a liar, baby. And you know what? The last thing I want to do is terrify you, and I believe I've been scaring you. You know, baby, I want you to feel safe with me. Of all the places on the planet you can be, I want you to feel the safest when you're at arm's length from me. The idea that I'm scaring you just bothers the crap out of me. And I got to tell you, I feel so bad, and I'm so sorry, and I don't know what I can do to make it right, but I promise you this. I promise I heard you, and I believe you. Now, I can't promise you I'll never do it again. I've been this way my whole life, but I promise you I'm going to try. And I'm going to make it a spiritual piece of business, and I'm going to work on this. And she said, that's all I've ever asked from you. And now the sun comes out, and everything's fine in the garage, and we got the music going again, and we go back to work. And a couple hours later, I got the inside of the garage sheeted off, and she's got a bunch of things done, and we're having a good time. And now I'm hanging these shelves in the garage, and I got the shelves up, and now I'm putting quarts of paint up in the shelves, and I'm stacking them up there. And I'm pushing up the quarts in the very top, and as I pushed up, I didn't realize I pushed this one piece off. And it was probably about 6 inches from the top of my foot by the time I realized it had fallen, and it was too late to pull my foot, and I'm wearing flip-flops. And this full quart of paint hits the small bones on top of my foot, and it goes, bam! And I said, oh! And I looked at my wife, and her eyes were about this big, and I said, you can't believe how bad this hurts. This is like pain you can taste. And she started laughing, and I started laughing. You know, and God, I did not realize that when because one of the things we do in inventories, we ask ourselves, if the situation was repeated, what, if anything, would you do differently? And I'd already made a commitment to act differently in the future. I just didn't think God would give me the chance 2 hours later, you know. And you see, I just didn't know I could do it any different. I didn't know there was another way to go. You know, I've had trouble in my marriage. I've had this confusion about the mystery of marriage and how do you figure out a woman and what do you do and how do you get to there? How do you make it work? How do you know what they need from you? It's just so confusing and so mysterious to me. And I didn't realize that all the information, all the answers to all the questions, to all the great mysteries of a woman was sleeping peacefully next to me in the bed every night. And I was afraid to ask. You know, and my wife and I started on a journey probably 15, 16 years ago to have a different experience with marriage. You know, our first 7 years weren't too slick, and the last 14 have been completely different. Because we made a commitment to learn how to talk to each other, to learn how to bring Alcoholics Anonymous into our marriage. And we started doing silly things, man. I remember I heard about this dumb exercise. Some guy in AA told me about it, and it sounded cool, so I went home to my wife and I said, hey, you want to do this exercise? It sounds like fun. She goes, well, yeah, sure, what is it? I go, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to rate me. She had a number instantly. It was not the number I was thinking of. I had to control my face, you know what I mean? And act all cool. And I said, well, if I am a 6, maybe a 7, how would I get to be a 7, maybe an 8? She had an answer for that too. Didn't even have to think about it. It was kind of insulting. She said, well, you could look at me when I talk to you. My intellectual reaction to that was, what are you talking about? I look at you when you talk to me. But, you know, I'm trying to be spiritual, Don. I'm trying to take this stuff under advisement. I said, well, okay, baby, I'll try to make sure I do that. A couple days later, we're on the couch, and she's talking to me. And she's about 5 minutes into telling me about her day, and I swear to God, my head starts to fly up like this. I would have rather looked at the blazing sun with my naked eyes than continue to look at my wife when she was talking to me. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. I'm just sitting there. My eyes are starting to water. I'm just staring there. I mean, I should have grabbed my own head and held on. What are you doing? I'm trying to look at you when you talk, damn it. You know, I had no idea that I had trouble looking at my wife when she talked to me. And I thought, my God, if I'm this wrong about that, what else am I wrong about? And my wife is funny, and here's a spot check 10-step. This is how fast a 10-step can be. And another example in my marriage. About 3 years ago, I'm minding my own business. There's no conflict in our marriage. We're getting along fine, no big deal. We're having coffee together in the morning, and she says, listen, I don't want to start anything. I have a question for you. I said, sure, baby, what's up? She goes, do you ever intend on, I don't know, making our bed? We've been married 18 years at this point. And I said probably the dumbest thing a man could say in that situation in the history of dumb men. I said, I thought you liked making the bed. She said to me, nobody likes making the bed. And at that moment, I did a spot check inventory. I ran it through in like 3 seconds. And this is what I said to my wife. I said, would you like me to make the bed? And she said, that'd be very nice. And I got to tell you, for the last 3 years, if I'm at home and we get out of that bed, I make the bed every day. It's not a big deal. It was a small adjustment, but I had no idea that this was a problem for her. And how many other things have been a problem for her that I'm just not aware of, or she tried to tell me, and I just wore her out by ignoring her. So I want to have a better marriage, and to have a better marriage, I have to go into that. And this principle comes actually from the big book and the fifth step. And remember, we're continuing to take personal inventory. That's steps 4 and 5. And it's the principle I touched on earlier. We usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. So when I'm trying to ask myself, how am I doing in my marriage, and I'm not talking to my wife, that's a fool's errand. I will never know how I'm doing in my marriage without talking to my wife. If I think I know how I'm doing at work without talking to my employer, I'll never know how I'm doing at work without talking to my employer. And I'll tell you, about once a month, I just go into my boss's office, we sit down, we have a cup of coffee, and I ask him, how am I doing? Is there anything you'd like me to be doing that I'm not doing now? Is there anything that'd make you happy? But you know what? We won't do that. You know why? We don't want to change. We don't want to know. And that's just fear. Fear tells me you don't want to look. Don't rock the boat. You might find out something you don't want. But every area of my life, I've got to be willing to go to the people that are involved in that area of my life, and I've got to do inventory. And to have accurate inventory, I'll need their participation. If I don't, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the areas of my life, and I'm trying to figure out how I'm doing. Solitary self-appraisal. I'm not talking to my sponsor. I'm not talking to the people involved. I'm grading myself. And I got to tell you, when I grade myself, I grade easy. That's my experience. I want to tell you another quick 10-step story, and then we'll stop by. I already talked a lot about my sister this weekend, and she's like my favorite person on the planet. Got sober in her house, spent my first 2 years of sobriety living there. When I moved out, she cried. I mean, we're just really good friends. And we've been friends my entire sobriety. But when I was about, 8 or 9 years sober, she went through a tough patch in her life, and she got divorced. And it was tough on our family. It was tough on everybody, because we all loved Larry, and he's a great guy. He's a great guy to this day. And they were that couple we never thought would get divorced, ever. They always seemed so happy and got along so well. And it was tough, and they were splitting up assets, and they were going to sell the house and move to different places. And my sister called me up. I was real concerned with her, and I was on the phone with her like every day. I mean, I was calling in and talking to her every single day for months leading up to the finalization of this divorce, just checking on her, seeing how she's doing. And finally, they were selling the house, and the house closed in escrow, and they had to get all their stuff out of it. And she said, can you help me move? I said, absolutely, it'd be my pleasure. And I got a bunch of my AA buddies together, man. We showed up on a Saturday, and we did what we do in AA, man. We moved all of the furniture that she was getting out of the divorce, and we moved it across town and moved it into her new place, and we busted her ass all day long. And I was so proud of my friends in AA and so proud of Alcoholics Anonymous, the way these guys showed up for free and for fun, just because there was a need, just because they had an affection for me. They said, of course, we'd love to help you. We understand. And they were kind to my sister, and they were such good examples of Alcoholics Anonymous. And at the end of the day, we're all done, and I'm getting ready to say goodbye to my sister and my brother-in-law, Larry, who I've been friends with Larry before they got married. And Larry showed up, and I was just catching up with him and talking, and it's uncomfortable, and he told me how much he hoped we could stay in touch and how much he loved me, and I was thanking him for everything he had done for me. And he said, listen, while you're here, he goes, I got one piece of furniture I'm keeping, that's it. That little armoire over there. And I've rented in a place like 2 blocks down the street. Do you think you could move it for me? I said, Larry, I'd love to do that. And I picked up this little armoire, and I threw it in my pickup truck, drove 2 blocks, dropped it off in the garage at Larry's house, drove back to my sister's house, went in, gave my sister a big hug. She thanked me so much for all the help. I said, I'd talk to you tomorrow. And I took off, and I felt good. Felt good about Alcoholics Anonymous, felt good about the living amends, felt good about that period of reconstruction I was taking the lead in. I was glad I could be there for my sister when she's having a tough time. Well, the next day I called my sister like I had been doing every day, and I got her voicemail, which wasn't unusual, and called to tell her I loved her and just give me a call when you get a minute, and she didn't call me back. And that was unusual, but I didn't think much of it. And I called her the next day and left her a message, and she didn't call me back that day. The third day I called her and left her a message. She didn't call me back. I started getting worried, and I called my mom. And I said, have you talked to Pat? She goes, God, I just talked to her 15 minutes ago. I go, is she okay? She goes, she's fine. I go, it's the weirdest thing. I've left her 3 messages, and she hasn't called me back. My mom went, oh. And I went, what, oh? And she goes, well, did you happen to move a piece of furniture for Larry? And I said, yeah, I moved an armoire. It was like, I don't know, 2 blocks down the street after I had moved an entire house of furniture for her. She goes, well, that pissed your sister off. I go, you got to be kidding me. She goes, I don't know. She said, you're her brother, not his. You shouldn't be doing stuff for the enemy. She went on this whole rant. And I said, you got to be kidding me. What are we, 8 years old? You got to be. And I said, that's ridiculous. And I get off the phone, right? I made the mistake is I'm driving somewhere, and I call my sponsor, and I'm telling him about my sister and all this. And he goes, well, it sounds like you got a resentment. And I go, I don't have a resentment. I'm just pissed off. I don't have a resentment, all right? She's being ridiculous. You got to tell what part could I possibly have? How could I be wrong in this? And he goes, well, I don't know. Maybe let's just go through this. My sponsor went through it with me on the phone. And so here's what we came up with. I'm resentful. Who am I resentful at? My sister. What's the cause? She's being unreasonable. I do all this stuff for her. It's very obvious I love her. I've always been in her corner. I move one lousy piece of furniture, and this is the way she said, what's it affecting? Well, it affects my security. It affects my self-esteem. It affects my confidence. It's hurting my feelings, you know? And, okay, I'm going to put that out of my mind. He asked me a question. He said, how many years did you drag your sister through the mud? I don't know. Over a decade. Over a decade. When everybody in the entire planet quit on you, who was the one person that didn't quit on you? When you were at your lowest point, nobody wanted anything to do with you, who opened up their home and took you in? I said, my sister. I said, so a person that did all that for you is what? At the lowest point of their existence. They're going through a divorce. Do you have any idea what that must be like for her? I said, no, I really don't. Do you think maybe you can give her this one? Do you think maybe you can show her the same compassion and patience and love and pity that she showed you all those years? And now I feel about 2 inches tall. And I said, of course I can. And I felt terrible. And what ensued for me was a year where I called my sister once a week. And I called her once a week like we had just talked the day before. And I'd say, hey, Pat, it's Don. How you doing? Just checking in. Just wanted you to know I love you. Hope everything's going good in your world. I'd tell her a little story about Eileen. I'd tell her something about going on in work, something going on with AA. I'd say, hey, get around to it. Just give me a call back. Just want you to know I was thinking of you, and I love you. And I'd leave that message, and she wouldn't call back. And I'd call the next week, and I'd say, hey, Pat, it's Don, just checking in, just been traveling a little bit. Eileen's doing great. The garden's coming in beautiful. You got to see the house. We've made a lot of changes. Love to see you, have you over for dinner if you get time. Just know that you're loved and you're missed, and I'm thinking of you. Hey, if you get around to it, you give me a call. No call back. I did that for a year. I left her a message every week. So at the appointed time and that time of the week where I always called my sister, I called her this one week. She answered the phone. I didn't know what to say. I was just waiting for the answering machine. Suddenly she's like, hello. And I go, Pat? And she's like, yeah. And I go, how's it going? She's like, good. How are you? Like nothing had happened. And we made some small talk and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, maybe we should get together and have a meal. She goes, that's great. Let's get together and have lunch. It's the weirdest conversation in the world. Like nothing had happened. And we went to lunch. And I had a commitment when I went there, and I made it with my sponsor. And I said, I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to ask. He goes, don't. Just go and enjoy lunch. I go, that's what I'm going to do. And I did really well. I made it about 45 minutes, right? And after about 45 minutes, man, I've already paid the bill, and the waiter's going, we're getting ready to go. And I'm sorry, Pat. You know, I said I wasn't going to do this, but I got to ask. And she goes, I know. I can't believe you made it this far. And I go, is it okay to ask? She goes, it's absolutely okay to ask. I go, what the hell was that about? And she goes, listen, you don't understand this. I go, this has been a tough year for me. And she goes, you know, when Larry and I split, I didn't see it coming. I didn't know my marriage was going to end. And it broke me in ways I didn't know I could be broken. And I was really angry. And I was really hurt. And I think I needed somebody to be safe with. I needed to be really angry with somebody that wouldn't throw me away. And I knew I could be angry with you, and I knew I could treat you badly, and I knew you wouldn't throw me away. I knew you wouldn't quit on me. And I got to tell you, it got worse, not better. And I had to go under psychiatric care, and I had to go on medication because I was suicidal, and I didn't know if I could find a reason for living. And every day I had to find another reason for not killing myself. And I got to tell you, there were a lot of nights, Donald, I was curled up in the fetal position, and I couldn't stop crying. And I was trying to think of a reason not to kill myself. And I'd get my phone out, and I'd play every message you had left me. And I had every message you ever left, and I'd play them over and over and over in a loop. And I'd sit there with tears in my eyes, and I'd hear how you said that you loved me, and I'd hear the joy in your voice, and you'd be making those funny voices, and you'd be telling me those funny stories. And I thought, not tonight, maybe tomorrow, but I won't kill myself tonight. And you got to understand that although I wasn't talking to you, you were with me every step of the way. And thanks for hanging in there with me. And I got to tell you, it's the greatest backhanded compliment I ever got, that I was making those amends to somebody, and I didn't even know I was doing it. I was taking sponsored direction. I was doing what I was taught in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had no idea what was going on with my sister. She cut off all contact with me. but I kept doing what my sponsor said. We kept making the approach. We kept making the approach. And I got to tell you, a couple of years ago, I had the honor and privilege of going to Iceland and carrying the message over in Iceland. And my wife, Eileen, and I, and a friend of mine were going to go over there, and my sister caught wind of it. She said, well, you're going to Iceland? I go, yeah, we're going to go to a couple of AA conferences. She said, can I go? And I go, I don't think it's going to be a lot of fun for you, Pat. We're just going to be doing AA for a couple of weeks, going to a couple of conferences. She goes, oh, I'd love to go. My sister went to Iceland with us on her own dime so she could hang out and just go to AA meetings as an observer, just a friend of the alcoholic. Of course, she did a couple of times say, when do I get to talk? And I was like, never. And she was like, I'd get done talking and she'd whisper in my ear, one of these days I'm going to tell them the truth. And we'd laugh and laugh. And I got to tell you, she loves Alcoholics Anonymous and she loves you. And you know, and this thing, I tell you this story because you don't know where this stuff goes. You don't know how you affect people. And I feel the same way that my friend Sheldon feels, you know. But I also want to mention this, I'm not that noble. You know, this had a lot to do with a sponsor who kept me grounded. Because I'm the guy, I get a resentment, I condemn you, and I move on with my life. You know, and I'm so glad I had a sponsor that was willing to take the time and continue to do inventory with me and point out these things to me that makes it possible for me to be a better man than I am naturally. Let's take a break. We're going to get started again. Don, alcoholic. We're going to start talking about the 11th step here. On page 85, down at the bottom of the page, it says, much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God conscious. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense, but we must go further, and that means more action. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than us are using it constantly. It works if we have the proper attitude and work at it. It would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. So I want to talk about what the 11th step looks like in my life. The first thing when we start talking about when we retire at night. When we retire at night, we constructively review our day. I want to stop right there. Of all the exercises in Alcoholics Anonymous, as a member and as a sponsor, the most difficult suggested action in Alcoholics Anonymous with step work has been the evening review. The 11-step evening review gave me the most difficulty to get consistent with it in my sobriety. It's been the most difficult thing for me to get my guys consistent with it, and continues to be quite daunting for a lot of the guys I sponsor. I want to just throw out a little helpful hint here, something that took me many, many years to start thinking about, and I changed the way that I approach my 11-step review. So the very first line says, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. This is what I thought that meant for me. It meant right before I go to bed. Now, it doesn't say right before I go to bed. What it says is when we retire at night. My translator that lives in my head, I will take things and I will translate them from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous into my own language, and I will interpret things, and I won't talk to anybody about it, including my sponsor. So what I was trying to do with my nightly review was wait till right before I go to bed. You know that part where you can't even watch TV anymore, your eyes are fluttering, they're about to close, and your head's kind of nodding off, and you go, man, I'm really tired, I should probably go to bed. And I would turn off the TV and I'd think, damn, I got an 11-step review to do. And I'd get my big book out and I'd kind of read the questions and I'd go, well, I got up, I didn't kill anybody today, that's not bad for a guy like me, yay God. And I'd go to bed. And I'd kid myself, I'll do better tomorrow. Years, and I'd love to tell you 4 or 5 years, more like 12 or 14 years into sobriety, I'm still inconsistent with my 11-step review. And I'm having a hell of a time doing it. And one day it struck me, because we got in the habit of looking up words in our book studies. And I started looking up the word, and I looked up the word retire. And one of the definitions for retire is work completed. And I thought, well, let me think about that a little bit. And so what I started thinking about, when I retire at night, what have I said when my work was completed? When is my work completed? Now, on an average day, I'll give you a typical Monday. I go to work. I'm usually up by 6:30 in the morning. I'm out the door by 6:45 or so, and I go and I work all day, and at the end of the day, I'll come home, and I'll say hi to my wife. I'll maybe grab a shower, and then I'm back out the door to my book study. And I go to the book study with the guys, and after that, we'll probably fellowship a little bit, and then I come home. Usually a couple of things I got to get done on the house, maybe a few chores, maybe take the dog out for a walk. But at that point, it's probably about 10 o'clock at night, and I am far from going to bed. And now we're entering into a phase of my day that I like to call quality Donnie time. Quality Donnie time is after I've done my AA stuff, I've gone to work, I've done all the honeydews, everything's done, and now I got a couple hours before I have to hit the rack and get ready for the next day. And what I used to do is I would just go right into relaxation, watching TV, watching a movie, do whatever I want, playing a video game. And what I started to do was I started to do my 11-step review at that point. And the funny thing about that is quality Donnie time, I'm wide awake. I just got in the house, I did a couple of things, I am wide awake. And suddenly the 11-step review at night became very easy. And I realized most of the problem I was having with it wasn't the work that I was being asked to do, it was the time I was trying to do it. And I found that I'm not very effective on doing anything right before I go to bed. Right before my head hits the pillow and I say goodnight to the world and I say goodnight to God, I'm not very effective to get anything done. Anybody that's ever known that, I mean, in our house, we have a rule. We try not to have any major discussions after 9 o'clock at night. We're too tired and it's not going to be productive. There's nothing worse than you're laying in bed and you're just about to fall asleep and you hear your wife's voice go, I've been thinking, and your eyes roll up in terror and like, I bet you have. We should probably talk about that tomorrow. So now that I'm doing my nightly review, at the end of my work, when my work is done for the day, I've completed everything. There's no more work to be done. Now I can stop and I can review my day and I can ask myself the questions outlined on page 86. And when I'm done with that, and I've asked those questions, I do this in a constructive manner. I do it with a little piece